Hello everybody. If you want to read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. Short story 226, The City and the Cat. Mia loved her life in the bustling city. Every day was a symphony of honking taxis, chattering crowds, and the rhythmic rumble of the underground train. Her tiny apartment, tucked away on a quiet side street, felt like a cosy haven amidst the urban chaos. But Mia wasn't alone. She shared her apartment with a ginger cat named Marmalade. Marmalade, however, wasn't a fan of the city. He spent most of his days curled up on the windowsill, watching birds flit past with a disdainful look. One sunny afternoon, Mia was working on her laptop when a knock on the door startled her. It was her neighbour, Mrs. Sanchez, a kind elderly woman with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Mia, darling," Mrs. Sanchez said, holding a basket overflowing with colourful vegetables. "Would you like some fresh produce? I found a wonderful new market today." "Oh, thank you so much, Mrs. Sanchez," Mia replied, taking the basket. "That's very kind of you." Mrs. Sanchez leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially, "There's something else, Mia. I saw a flyer for a cat competition this weekend. They're looking for the most handsome feline in the city." Mia glanced at Marmalade, who was now eyeing the vegetables with suspicion. "A cat competition?" "Yes, a chance for your little tiger to win the grand prize." Mrs. Sanchez winked. "Think of it, fame, fortune, maybe even a lifetime supply of catnip." Mia chuckled. Marmalade isn't exactly a fan of attention. "Nonsense," Mrs. Sanchez insisted. "Every cat has a secret desire for glory. You should at least try." The idea sparked something in Mia. Maybe a change of scenery would be good for Marmalade. She thanked Mrs. Sanchez and promised to consider it. The weekend arrived and Mia found herself carrying a grumpy Marmalade in a fancy cat carrier towards the park where the competition was held. The park was bustling with people and cats of all shapes and sizes. Marmalade hissed at the sight of a fluffy Persian lounging in a miniature throne. The competition was fierce. Cats strutted down a makeshift runway, some dressed in tiny outfits, others showing off their impressive jumps. Marmalade, however, refused to cooperate. He flattened his ears and dug his claws into the carrier. Just when Mia was about to concede defeat, the announcer called out, "And for our final contest, all the way from the heart of the city, please welcome Marmalade." Mia gently coaxed Marmalade out, expecting the worst. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of cowering, Marmalade stood tall, his ginger fur gleaming in the sunlight. He surveyed the crowd with a regal air, then let out a loud, confident meow. The crowd erupted in cheers. Marmalade, it seemed, had captivated them with his unexpected swagger. He didn't win the competition, but he certainly stole the show. Later, as they walked back home, Mia noticed Marmalade seemed different. He held his head a little higher, and even looked out the window with a hint of curiosity. "Maybe you enjoyed the competition after all, Marmalade," she said with a smile. Marmalade blinked at her, then stretched luxuriously, purring softly. That night a new sound filled the tiny apartment, the gentle chirping of birds outside the window, and the contented purr of a city cat who had finally found his voice. Vocabulary notes. Bustling. Adjective. Lively and full of activity. Example. The city was a bustling place with people everywhere. Haven. Noun. A safe and peaceful place. Example. Her tiny apartment felt like a haven amidst the urban chaos. Disdainful. Adjective. Showing a lack of respect or interest. Example, Marmalade watched the birds with a disdainful look. Startled, verb, suddenly surprised. Example, a knock on the door startled her. Elderly, adjective, getting old. Example, Mrs. Sanchez was a kind elderly woman. Mischievous, adjective, playful and likely to cause trouble. Example, Mrs. Sanchez had a mischievous glint in her eyes. Conspiratorially, adverb, in a way that suggests a secret plan. Example, Mrs. Sanchez leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially. Glance, verb, to look quickly at something. Example, Mia glanced at Marmalade. Suspicious, adjective, feeling that something is wrong or dangerous. Example, Marmalade eyed the vegetables with suspicion. Chuckle, verb, to laugh quietly. Example, Mia chuckled at the idea of Marmalade being famous. Bustling, adjective, very busy and full of activity. Example, the park was bustling with people and cats. Fierce, adjective, intense and competitive. Example, the competition was fierce. Strut, verb, to walk in a confident and proud way. Example, Cat strutted down a makeshift runway. Cower, verb, to crouch down in fear. Example, Mia expected Marmalade to cower. Regal, adjective, royal or majestic. Example, Marmalade stood tall with a regal air. Swagger, noun, confident and stylish behaviour. Example, Marmalade captivated the crowd with his unexpected swagger. Contentment, noun, a feeling of happiness and satisfaction. Example, the contented purr of a city cat who had finally found his voice. Food, produce, noun, fruits and vegetables that are grown. Example, Mrs. Sanchez offered Mia some fresh produce. Animals, feline, noun, a cat. Example, Mrs. Sanchez called Marmalade a little tiger, which is another word for a feline. Purr, verb, the sound a cat makes when it is happy. Example, Marmalade purred softly. Hiss, verb, the sound a cat makes when it is angry. Example, Marmalade hissed at the sight of the other cats. Meow, verb, the sound a cat makes. Example, Marmalade let out a loud confident meow. Places. Underground train. Noun, a subway train. This term might be unfamiliar to learners from some countries. Other. Carrier, noun, a container used to transport animals. Example, Maria carried Marmalade in a fancy cat carrier. Miniature, adjective, very small. Example, the Persian cat lounged in a miniature throne. Concede defeat, phrase, to admit that you have lost. Example, Mia was about to concede defeat. Additional vocabulary notes. Phrasal verbs. Tucked away, located in a hidden or quiet place. Example, her tiny apartment was tucked away on a quiet side street. Looked after, cared for. Example, Mia looked after Marmalade. Leaned closer, moved closer. Example, Mrs. Sanchez leaned closer and whispered. Sparked something, started something. Example, the idea sparked something in Mia. Glanced at, looked quickly at something. Example, Mia glanced at Marmalade. Glanced at, looked quickly at something. Example, Mia glanced at Marmalade. eyed with suspicion, looked at with doubt or distrust. Example, Marmalade eyed the vegetables with suspicion. Cooled down, became calmer. Example, Marmalade cooled down after the competition. Idioms, all the way from, coming from a distant place. Example, all the way from the heart of the city. Stole the show, attracted everyone's attention and praise. Example, Marmalade stole the show. Other useful words. Symphony, a pleasant combination of sounds. Example, the city was a symphony of honking taxis. Rhythmic, regular and repeated. Example, the rhythmic rumble of the underground train. Glittering, shining brightly. Example, her eyes were glittering with excitement. Captivated, fascinated and attracted. Example, the crowd was captivated by Marmalade. Story written by Google Gemini AI. Images created by Designer AI. To read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you.